Hello, Discrete Math. This is lesson number 2 in chapter 1. So we're going to continue our discussion of the mathematics behind elections. Today we're going to focus that on the plurality method. So the plurality method is actually pretty simple. Is that the candidate with the most first place votes, called the plurality candidate, wins. Don't need each voter to rank the candidates. In fact, all they have to do is give their first choice. So a vast majority of elections for political office in the United States are decided using the plurality method. If you think about it, should kind of make sense. I know most of you have not had the chance to vote yet, but when you go in to vote, you pick your top one. You don't get to say, this is my first choice, second choice, third choice. It's whoever your top candidate is, and that's it. Now, that means that there are quite a few drawbacks. Really, besides the fact that it's just simple to do, the plurality method really does not have a whole lot else going on for it. So, going back to our math club election example that we were looking at in the previous lesson. Under that plurality method, we had A, who received 14 first place votes. B had a total of 4, C got 11, and D got 8. So pretty easy to decide who wins in the plurality method, which is A. So Alicia would win the math club election. So the allure of this plurality method lies in its simplicity. Really, if you think about it, voters have little patience for complicated procedures, and you think about the fact that even using the most simple method possible, a plurality method, you see how many people don't even bother to show up to vote. So if you can imagine if it was even a more complicated procedure, that we'd probably have even less people out to vote. In fact, plurality is a natural extension of this majority rule. So majority rule says that in a democratic election between two candidates, the candidate with a majority, or more than half of the votes, should be the winner. Here's the problem with that. When there's two candidates, plurality candidate always is the majority candidate as well, and everything works. But when there's 3 or more, there isn't a guarantee that there's going to be a majority candidate. A good example of this is talking about in the United States elections with third-party candidates. If you look at the percentage of votes, oftentimes it's 49% for this candidate, 47% for this candidate, and then the other 4% is split up among the other candidates who are running, which means that the winner in plurality method, even though they might only have 49%, would be chosen, although they're not the majority candidate. So that's where you have to be kind of careful when you get to those 3 or more candidate systems. So in our math club election example, a majority would have required at least 19 first place votes because there were 37 total votes. Alicia, with 14 first place votes, obviously was our plurality candidate, but was pretty far away from being our majority candidate. She would have had to have gotten 5 more votes from somewhere. In fact, with a lot of candidates, so the more candidates you have, the percentage of the vote that you need to win under plurality can be ridiculously low. You think about it, if there's 10 people running, you might only need 4 votes to win, which is a little bit kind of crazy to think about. To give you another example of this, let's talk about the marching band election. So at this same university, so it's Tasmania State University, they have a really good marching band. And in fact, they're so good that this coming bowl season, they've got invitations to perform at 5 different bowl games. They can perform at the Rose Bowl, which we'll call R, the Hula Bowl H, Fiesta Bowl F, Orange Bowl O, and the Sugar Bowl S. An election is going to be held among the 100 members of the band to decide which of those 5 bowl games they would prefer. A preference schedule, given the results of that election, is shown here. So, out of the choices, we had 49 people choose the Rose Bowl first, Hula Bowl second, Fiesta Bowl third, and then the other 2 bowls last. We had 48 that chose the Hula Bowl first, and then 3 that chose the Fiesta Bowl first. So based on our plurality method, the Rose Bowl would win. So going back to that previous slide, if you look at it, we had 49 first place votes for R. That automatically makes that our plurality candidate. However, it's really not a really good outcome because if you look at it, the other 51 voters had the Rose Bowl as their last or their least favorite outcome. So while it might be the favorite among 49, it's not a majority candidate for sure because there's 51 others that voted against it. In fact, the Hula Bowl would have probably been the better choice because going back to the table, you had 49 plus 3 is 52 that chose it as their second choice and 48 that chose it as their first choice, which means that you could have all 100 band members going to somewhere with either their first or second choice, as opposed to having 49 with their first choice and the other 51 with their last or least favorite choice. So you can see probably where the plurality method now really is not all that great of a method. So comparing the Hula Bowl to any of the other bowls on a head-to-head basis, it's always preferred. So if you look Hula Bowl versus the Rose Bowl, it wins 51 to 49. That's the closest one. That's the first one. Um, Hula Bowl versus the Fiesta Bowl, 97 to 3. It's not even a competition. Hula Bowl versus the Orange Bowl, 100 to nothing. And Hula Bowl versus Sugar Bowl, again, 100 to nothing. So no matter which one we compare it to, Hula Bowl always ends up being a majority winner. So that kind of leads us into another topic that we'll discuss before we wrap things up for today, which is the idea behind what's called insincere voting. So, the idea behind insincere voting, also known as strategic voting, is simple. If we know that the candidate we really don't want has no chance of winning, then rather than wasting our vote, we can actually maybe decide to cast it on a lesser choice that would have a better chance of winning. And you see this happen all the time in elections in the United States. For president, for example, even though there might be a third party candidate that you like better, you know that they're not going to win. So you might choose a lesser option that's not your favorite necessarily. And that way you can get a candidate that you still like, but maybe not as much as your first choice. Let's see how this maybe gets used in the marching band example. So it just so happens that the three members of the band realized that there was no chance that their first choice, the Fiesta Bowl, was going to win the election. So instead of wasting their votes, they decided to make a strategic move, and they changed it to cast their votes for the Hula Bowl by switching the first and second choices on their ballots. So here was the original real preferences. So you notice that there were these three band members who had the Fiesta Bowl first and Hula Bowl as second. But knowing that the Fiesta Bowl wasn't going to win, because you can see where it's pretty low on these other two preferences, what they decided to do to make sure that they still got one of their top choices is they switched these two choices, meaning that they placed their votes for the Hula Bowl first and the Fiesta Bowl second. And you can see how that changes things because now the Hula Bowl ends up getting 51 votes compared to the 49 for the Rose Bowl. Now the Hula Bowl wins. So that simple switch, just three voters changing their votes, changed the entire outcome of the election. And the new preference schedule gives the win to the Hula Bowl. So one of the major flaws of the plurality method is the ease with which it can be manipulated by a voter or a block of voters voting insincerely. So that's kind of a major thing that shows up, especially in our elections here in the United States, because of our choice of using the plurality method. So some examples of that I've been discussing. In real world elections, both 2000 and 2004 presidential elections were really close races. And in fact, Ralph Nader lost quite a few votes because they didn't want to, people didn't want to waste their vote on him. They liked him as a candidate, but they didn't necessarily think that he was going to be capable of winning. And so they ended up voting for a different candidate that they really didn't prefer. In fact, independent and small party candidates really don't get a fair voice in our voting system. And part of that is because you have to have at least 5% of the vote to qualify for federal funds, which is a huge deal when it comes to elections. And so this two-party system, and I'm not trying to bash our system because there are some advantages and obviously some disadvantages, but it usually gives voters not very much choice. It's kind of the downside of our system. Okay, so that's plurality method. that wraps up our second lesson for this chapter. We'll be back with our third lesson, which will be talking about, I believe, either the board account method or plurality with choice, or plurality with elimination. So I guess you have to watch that video to find out which one. That being said, have a good rest of your time, guys, and I'll see you next time.